The dining room had gone quiet, the way a room only goes quiet right before something breaks. 60 people, candlelight, my father's photograph propped against a vase of white lilies, and my brother's wife pointing a manicured finger across the table at me. She's been stealing from this family for 2 years, Renata said, loud enough for the caterers to stop moving. Ask her about the missing $40,000 if you don't believe me. I didn't raise my voice. I set my wine glass down so carefully it didn't make a sound, and I asked her one question. Where exactly did you get that number? She didn't answer. She just smiled, the way people smile when they think they've already won. 5 minutes later, a man none of us had invited walked through the restaurant's front door with a leather folder under his arm, and the name on that folder's tab was about to undo every word she'd just said. But here's the part that nobody talks about. My name's Elena Vance. I'm 34, and for 9 years I'd kept the books for Vance and Sons, the restaurant my father built from a single diner on the lake into 4 locations across 2 counties. People assume controller is a boring job. It isn't, not when the business is also your family. I learned to read a balance sheet the way my father read weather, early warning, then quiet correction, never panic. He trusted me with the numbers the way he trusted my brother Daniel with the floor, the staff, the customers who liked a handshake more than an invoice. We split things naturally. Daniel ran the rooms, I ran the math. It worked for years. Then Daniel married Renata. She came from money that had quietly run out, and she had a gift for making people feel lucky to be near her. For a while. She redecorated. She consulted. She started sitting in on vendor meetings she had no reason to attend. My father, sick by then with a cancer that would take him 18 months later, watched it happen and said one thing to me privately in the office above the second location. Keep your own copies of everything, Elena, just in case. I didn't ask in case of what. I should have. After he passed, the partnership split ownership 3 ways on paper. Daniel, Renata, and me, but only Daniel and I had ever signed payroll or touched a supplier contract. Renata wanted that changed. She wanted a seat with weight behind it, not just a name on a document. At a family dinner not long after the funeral, she asked, almost lightly, why a bookkeeper needed equal say in decisions that affected the whole brand. I told her my title was controller, not bookkeeper, and let it go at that. I didn't fight her on it loudly. I never fight anything loudly. I just kept doing the job, kept the books clean, and told myself that quiet competence would speak for itself eventually. Looking back, I can see the small tells I waved off at the time. Renata learning the names of our suppliers before she'd ever set foot in a kitchen. Daniel growing quieter whenever I asked routine questions about invoices that used to take him 30 seconds to explain. A new account number that showed up on a reconciliation sheet one month, one I assumed, without checking closely enough, was simply a renamed existing vendor. None of it looked like much on its own. That's the thing about a slow betrayal. It never hands you one moment to point to. It hands you 100 small ones and trusts you'll be too busy or too kind to ever add them up. There was a version of those 2 years where I could have stopped it earlier if I'd been a different kind of person. Louder, more suspicious, less willing to give my own brother the benefit of every doubt. I've made peace with the fact that I wasn't, and that the version of me who trusted Daniel completely is also the version who kept clean enough records that the truth had nowhere left to hide once someone finally went looking. It almost cost me everything before it ever got the chance to. But what happened next? Nobody could have prepared for. The whispers started small, the way they always do. A comment at a staff meeting about tightening up the books. A pointed question from a regional supplier about whether the company was having cash flow issues. I traced each one back eventually to the same source. Renata, dropping concern like seeds at a dinner party, never quite an accusation, just enough doubt to make people lean in. I confronted Daniel about it once, in the kitchen of the original location, the one with our father's photo by the register. She's worried, that's all, he said, not meeting my eyes. She thinks the numbers don't add up some months. Then tell her to ask me directly, I said. I'll show her every line. He said he would. He never did. I remember standing there afterward, listening to the dish machine cycle in the back, thinking that my brother had just lied to my face for the first time in our lives and made it sound like a favor. The accusation went public at the worst possible moment. My father's 1-year memorial dinner, the whole extended family, and half our oldest staff in the room. Renata waited until the toasts were done, until everyone had a glass in hand and nowhere to look but at us. And then she said it. Stealing. $40,000, loud enough that the room went still around us like a held breath. I asked her where she'd gotten that number. She didn't have an answer ready, which told me everything. Somebody had handed her a figure, and she'd repeated it like scripture. Daniel sat there and said nothing, not a word in my defense. 6 months of marriage to a woman who needed a villain, and my own brother had simply let me become one. I went home that night and didn't cry. I sat at my kitchen table with our company's real books open in front of me, and I went through every transaction for the last 2 years, line by line, the way I'd been trained to from the day my father handed me my first ledger. Nothing matched what Renata had said. There was no missing $40,000 in any account I controlled. The math was clean. It had always been clean. That was the strange comfort and the strange horror of it at the same time. I knew with total certainty I hadn't done what she'd said, and I had absolutely no idea yet when it actually happened. But there was something else. A vendor I didn't recognize. A kitchen equipment leasing company that had been paid 11 times over 14 months, always approved through Daniel's signature, never mine. I'd seen the invoices before. I'd assumed, because Daniel had signed off, that it was operational and fine. I had never once questioned my own brother's signature. I sat with that for a long time, my coffee going cold beside the ledger, the house silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. The question wasn't whether money had gone missing. It clearly had. The question was whose hands it had actually passed through, and who had decided it was safer to point those hands at me. The truth had been hiding in plain sight all along. And when it finally came out, I hired a lawyer named Priya Anand, and I told her everything: the dinner, the rumor, the unfamiliar vendor, my father's strange warning 18 months before he died. She listened without interrupting, which I'd learned was rare in her profession, and when I finished, she said something I've held on to since. If they want to call this theft in public, then we make them prove it in a room where lying costs something. We filed for defamation, naming the specific statement, the witnesses in that dining room, and the professional harm, the partnership vote, that had quietly stalled the moment the rumor started circulating among our suppliers and our bank. Renata's response, through her lawyer, didn't deny the number. It doubled down. The defense claimed the missing funds were real, and that as controller, the responsibility, legally and practically, was mine alone. It was the worst thing they could have argued, though they didn't know it yet, because to prove the money was missing on my watch, they had to open every account it had ever touched, including the one with Daniel's signature on it, 11 separate times. Priya brought in an independent forensic auditor named Marcus Webb, a quiet, exacting man who treated a general ledger the way I imagined a detective treated a crime scene. He didn't rush. He cross-referenced bank records, vendor registrations, even the business address listed for that unfamiliar leasing company. It took him 3 weeks to call me with what he'd found. In that time, I went on running the restaurants exactly as I always had, smiling at staff who'd heard the rumor and now didn't know how to look at me, opening the books every morning, not knowing if I was about to find proof I was guilty of something I knew, with absolute certainty, I had never done. The leasing company didn't exist as a real vendor. It was registered to an address that belonged to Renata's cousin, a man who had no kitchen equipment, no warehouse, no employees, nothing but a bank account that received payments from Vance and Sons and forwarded a portion of them straight back to a personal account Daniel had opened the same month our father's diagnosis came in. 11 payments, $41,000, almost exactly the figure Renata had announced at that dinner table, except it had never been missing from my side of the books at all. It had been moving quietly through my brother's signature the entire time. My own brother had built the very theft he let his wife accuse me of in front of everyone we knew. Stay with me, because what I am about to tell you will leave you speechless. The hearing was held on a Tuesday morning in a courtroom that smelled like floor polish and old paper. Daniel sat beside his lawyer in a suit that looked borrowed. Renata sat behind him, rigid, in the same posture she'd had at that dinner table the night she decided I was disposable. I sat next to Priya and felt, for the first time in over a year, something close to steady ground. Marcus Webb testified first, calm and methodical, walking the court through the leasing company that wasn't a company, the cousin who wasn't a vendor, the 11 payments that traced a perfect, ugly line from our restaurant's account to my brother's personal one. He didn't raise his voice once. He didn't need to. The numbers did all the shouting for him. When Priya asked him directly who had authorized each of the 11 payments, he answered without hesitation, Daniel Vance, every time. I watched my brother's face while that sentence landed in the room. I watched Renata's face change faster, from certainty to confusion to something that looked almost like fear, as if she was only now doing the math on what her husband had actually been hiding from both of us. That's not, Daniel started, half rising from his chair, and his own lawyer put a hand on his arm to sit him back down. Renata turned toward him in the gallery and said his name like an accusation, low and sharp enough that the room heard it anyway. You told me it was her. Daniel didn't answer. He just stared at the table in front of him, and in that silence, I understood that for over a year, he had let his wife carry a lie he'd built with his own hands, and let her carry it loud enough to humiliate me in front of everyone who'd ever respected our father's name. I didn't shout. I promised myself I wouldn't, no matter how this went. When the judge asked if I had anything to add, I stood and said only one thing. I kept every copy, because our father once told me to, in case. I just never asked him in case of what. I sat back down. It was the only sentence I needed. For a moment, nobody in that courtroom moved. I could hear the air conditioning, the soft scratch of the court reporter's hands, my own heartbeat slower than it had been in over a year. Daniel finally lifted his head and looked at me, not at Renata, not at his lawyer, just at me. And for 1 second, I saw something that might have been the brother I grew up with before the money and the marriage and the silence. It didn't last. He looked back down at the table. The case didn't go to a full trial after that. Daniel's lawyer requested a recess to discuss settlement before the morning was over. And I knew, the way you know a fever has finally broken, that the worst of it was already done. At that exact moment, she finally understood why everything had been a lie. The settlement gave me full editorial control of the books going forward, a public retraction read into the partnership's official minutes, and Daniel's voluntary exit from active management, though not from ownership. That part I left to the lawyers and the family, not to me. I didn't ask for revenge. I'd never wanted it. I wanted the lie to stop being louder than the truth, and once it was, I found I had very little appetite for punishing my own brother any further than the law already required. Renata didn't come to see me afterward. I heard, through people who still talk in this town the way people always will, that she and Daniel separated within the year. I felt no satisfaction in that, only a tired kind of sadness for the family dinners that used to happen in that dining room before all of this, the ones I doubt we'll ever have again. I think, in her own way, Renata had been used too, handed a number she never checked, told a story she had every reason to believe, because believing it let her see herself as the wronged one instead of the one married to the actual problem. That doesn't excuse what she said to me in front of 60 people. It just means I've stopped needing her to suffer for it. I still run the books at Vance & Sons. I open the office above the original location most mornings, the one with my father's photo by the register, and some days I still hear his voice in my head, keep your own copies just in case. I finally understand what he meant. Not because he knew exactly what was coming, but because he knew, better than any of us, that quiet people get written into stories other people tell about them, whether those stories are true or not. He spent his whole life building something with his hands, and in the end, the thing that protected it wasn't a lawyer or a lock on a door. It was a habit he taught his daughter without ever explaining why. If you've ever been called the dishonest one by someone who already knew the truth and chose to bury it anyway, let this be the reminder that the books always balance eventually. They just take their time getting there.